"Do not trouble yourself with me, madam, I am quite content alone." The words fell into the hushed, perfumed air of the tea-room like a soft chime, and yet their defiance carried the weight of invisible chains. Sunlight slanted through lace-curtained windows, gilding the dust motes that danced lazily above polished mahogany tables, each one set with silver spoons that gleamed like tiny beacons of scrutiny. The heroine, modestly attired in a gown of muted blue silk, sat at a corner table, her hands folded upon the delicate lace cloth. She was neither ostentatious nor daring, yet her presence drew eyes, furtive, lingering, judgmental. The whispering began almost immediately, a cascade of opinions hidden beneath polite smiles and fluttering fans. "She surely fancies herself above our company," murmured one lady, her voice carrying just enough to reach the nearest attentive ear. "Quite, but observe the simplicity of her dress. It is almost daring in its plainness," replied another, a hint of malice coloring the syllables. The heroine lowered her gaze, lips pressed thin, yet her heart fluttered, not in shame but in the awareness of being watched, measured, catalogued. There was a certain satisfaction in her restraint, a quiet rebellion against a society that demanded spectacle from women of her standing, however modest. Each glance, each whispered comment, was a gauntlet thrown. She accepted it with the fragile dignity of one accustomed to the harsh arithmetic of wealth and lineage. The air shifted subtly with the entrance of the Duke's mother, a woman whose presence seemed to command every glimmer of candlelight, every reflected curve of gilded mirror, without a word. Her eyes, sharp and discerning, swept the room until they settled upon the heroine, lingering with an almost imperceptible curiosity. She approached, her skirts rustling against the polished floor, and lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, "Pretend you are my son's fiancée tonight." The word struck like a bell tolling across the heroine's composed facade. A dozen possibilities unspooled in her mind: shame, exposure, scandal, but behind the fear lay a spark of audacious hope. To act, even under pretense, was to step from the shadows into a light she had scarcely permitted herself to imagine. From a distant corner, the Duke observed. He was a man whose stature and composure seemed inseparable from the gilded surroundings. Even at rest, his eyes commanded attention, dark and unreadable, yet betraying a flicker of interest. His glance lingered long enough for the heroine to feel its weight, a magnetic pull that drew her attention despite the invisible wall she had built around her heart. Her hands, once still, now flexed at her sides, fingers tracing invisible patterns along the tablecloth, a private ritual of fortitude. The whisper of the Duke's mother lingered in her mind, a challenge and an invitation intertwined. She knew that to accept was to risk ridicule, to step into a night where eyes and tongues might turn against her, but to refuse was to surrender the possibility of change, of engagement with a world both cruel and breathtakingly alive. Outside, rain began to fall in fine, persistent threads, streaking the windows with silvery rivulets that refracted the late afternoon light. The room seemed smaller, more intimate, and every whispered opinion, every judging glance, carried sharper weight. The heroine rose slowly, heart steadied by necessity and curiosity alike. She knew the evening would demand grace, courage, and careful navigation of a society ready to pounce upon any misstep. Yet, in that fragile moment of quiet rebellion, she felt the stirring of possibility, an awakening long denied, a faint promise that the night might not end in humiliation, but in revelation. The gaze of the Duke met hers once more across the room, brief but incendiary, a silent acknowledgment that the game had begun. She inhaled, a subtle shiver of anticipation coursing through her, and allowed the faintest, controlled smile to grace her lips. The world, in its relentless observation, would not yet claim her. Not tonight. Tonight, she would step into the narrative whispered by audacious command, and the consequences, whatever they might be, would unfold with deliberate, tense inevitability. And so, with the weight of society pressing on her shoulders and the thrill of uncertain intrigue quickening her pulse, she rose from her solitary seat, ready to meet the first act of a night that promised scandal, revelation, and the intoxicating, unspoken pull of a man whose attention could not be ignored. A gift, madam, is not merely for the hands but for the heart it touches. The evening descended with a slow, deliberate grace, drawing the drawing room into a warm glow of amber candlelight that shimmered against polished mahogany and gilt-framed portraits. The heroine entered quietly, her heart a fragile metronome, each beat echoing in rhythm with the soft rustle of silk skirts and measured steps of observing guests. The room was thick with expectation, whispers curling around crystal decanters and lace-edged tables, and the air itself seemed to hum with the unsaid, the scandal poised just beneath polite conversation. From the moment she crossed the threshold, eyes followed her, not all with malice, but enough to send a ripple of tension through her carefully composed demeanor. Some lingered with curiosity, some with judgment, yet all seemed compelled to measure her every gesture. She moved with deliberate restraint, acknowledging nods and murmurs with a polite tilt of her head, but in the recesses of her mind, a storm of questions raged. Who would dare to speak first? Who would dare to misunderstand? Who would dare to provoke? A soft knock at the far end of the room drew her attention, and a young footman approached with a small, unassuming parcel tied with pale blue ribbon. The heroine's fingers brushed against it cautiously, her pulse quickening. Inside lay a single flower, white as moonlight, delicate in its simplicity, accompanied by a note written in elegant, measured script. Even in a world of scrutiny, some gestures remain ours alone. The sender, she knew instinctively, was no ordinary admirer. The Duke. Her breath caught, not in fear but in the startling weight of attention. This token, small yet laden with meaning, spoke to something beyond scandal, beyond society's relentless gossip. It spoke to recognition, to awareness, to the subtle acknowledgement of her existence in a room crowded with eyes and judgment. A thrill passed through her as she realized the power of a gesture both intimate and perilous, a declaration wrapped in discretion. Yet the room did not pause for intimacy. Whispers had taken root like vines, twisting around her name in speculation. "Surely she is overstepping her bounds," murmured a lady in the corner, her fan flicking nervously as if to lash out at imagined impropriety. Another chimed in, "To appear as the Duke's fiancée without his confirmation. What audacity, what presumption." The heroine felt the sting, the quiet weight of society's scrutiny pressing against her shoulders, and yet she did not falter. Every movement, every breath, was now a careful negotiation of propriety and self-possession. The Duke himself remained an enigma across the room, his posture impeccably straight, fingers lightly drumming upon the edge of a table as he observed her reaction with subtle intensity. His gaze was at once measured and penetrating, a silent dialogue that passed between them without a word. Each glance was a challenge, a question, a spark of unspoken intrigue that threaded through the conversation surrounding them. The scandal that threatened to define the evening instead became a silent stage upon which their connection began to unfold. An unexpected interruption arrived in the form of a rival, a woman long accustomed to commanding attention and admiration. Her approach was poised, calculated, every gesture honed to display elegance while casting veiled disdain. "What delightful fortune," she said, voice silk over steel, "that we witness such a curious partnership." The heroine's pulse quickened, but her posture remained composed. Her mind raced, weighing discretion against the thrill of subtle triumph. In a quiet corner, as the rival continued her insinuations, the Duke stepped closer, lowering his voice to a tone that brushed against her ear with the intimacy of a whispered secret. "Do not allow their tongues to weigh upon you. Observe them if you must, but do not let them tether your spirit." His words, deliberate and magnetic, sent a shiver of warmth along her spine, and for a fleeting moment, the noise of the room receded, leaving only the cadence of their private understanding. The evening progressed, punctuated by stolen glances, subtle gestures, and the quiet rhythm of scandalous speculation. Every small token, the note, the flower, the glance, wove a tapestry of tension and possibility, binding them in a narrative of intrigue, danger, and the fragile beginnings of desire. As the final candle flickered, casting elongated shadows across the walls, the heroine found herself perched at the edge of revelation. The scandal had begun, yes, but so had the delicate, consuming game of hearts, whispered words, and secret acknowledgments that would define the nights to come. And in that charged, gilded space, she understood. The evening's trials had not diminished her, they had awakened her. The tokens of attention, the quiet scandals, the gaze of a man whose interest threatened to unravel her carefully constructed composure, all had set in motion a story that would demand courage, cunning, and perhaps, just perhaps, a surrender to the unspoken promises that lingered in candlelight. "I have never dared speak aloud what my heart whispers in the dark." The rain had grown insistent, tapping a steady rhythm against the tall panes of the conservatory windows, each droplet tracing silver paths that blurred the view of the gardens beyond. Inside, the air was warm, perfumed with the faint scent of jasmine and the lingering aroma of smoldering logs from the nearby hearth. The heroine sat near the edge of a velvet settee, fingers twisting a lace handkerchief as her gaze flitted toward the floor, hesitant yet aware of the presence beside her. The Duke stood a short distance away, hands clasped behind his back, the lamplight catching the dark sheen of his hair and casting shadows that deepened the intensity of his regard. "You must allow me to ask," he said, voice low, deliberate, Why you choose to bear this evening's scrutiny with such measured calm. Few could endure it with grace, and fewer still without despair. Her eyes lifted slowly, meeting his with a mix of defiance and uncertainty. Grace, sir, is a necessity for those of us with little recourse, she replied softly, each word chosen with care. I have long learned that the judgments of others are a burden I cannot unweigh. Yet, there are moments when restraint becomes a prison. He stepped closer, the distance shrinking, each movement deliberate, careful not to startle yet heavy with intent. And yet here you remain, he murmured almost to himself, though the words brushed her ear like a whispered caress. Perhaps not entirely imprisoned then. Perhaps even defiant. The heroine felt a flutter of heat rise to her cheeks, but she did not retreat. The silence that followed was thick with possibility, charged with a tension neither had yet dared to name. The room, with its flickering lamplight and rain-streaked windows, became a sanctuary where confessions could take root, unobserved, unjudged. I admit, she whispered finally, voice trembling, that part of me feared this evening, the judgments, the whispers, but another part, the foolish, daring part, wished to know your mind, sir. To see if your gaze held anything beyond propriety, beyond expectation. Her hand tightened on the lace, a gesture of courage as much as restraint. He moved still closer, now within reach yet leaving a respectful distance that seemed almost cruel in its intent. You presume too much, he said softly, though his voice betrayed the slightest edge of longing. And yet, I find your presumption compelling. A faint, almost imperceptible smile brushed her lips, and for the first time that evening the tension shifted, not into ease but into recognition. They were no longer merely participants in a carefully choreographed masquerade of societal expectation. They were actors in a moment entirely of their own making, bound by proximity, gaze, and the unspoken acknowledgement of mutual intrigue. The room seemed to contract around them, the outside world of whispers and judgment fading to an echo. Rain pattered more insistently against the glass, a private symphony accompanying the slow unveiling of hearts. The Duke's hand hovered near hers, a deliberate hesitation that spoke louder than any rushed gesture could. If one were to speak honestly, he murmured, the world would call it folly, yet my mind cannot abide restraint when faced with the truth of what I feel. Her pulse quickened, every beat a drum signaling both fear and exhilaration. And what truth is that, sir? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt, carrying both defiance and hope. His eyes darkened with something unspoken, something that required neither words nor artifice. That the restraint we both wear is thinner than we admit, and that my thoughts, however concealed, dwell upon you far more often than propriety allows. The heroine drew a shallow breath, the lace handkerchief trembling slightly between her fingers. The revelation, though delicate and tentative, ignited a new courage within her. She rose, inch by inch, until the distance between them was measured in whispers and unspoken possibilities. The storm outside mirrored the tempest within, each raindrop a punctuation to the intimate, dangerous truths laid bare. I wish to understand, sir, she said, voice steadying with resolve. I wish to see if your thoughts are indeed as sincere as they seem, or if they, too, are imprisoned by expectation. He inclined his head, a shadow of a smile curving his lips, and in that simple gesture lay a universe of promise, a tacit agreement that the night had only just begun. In the hush of the conservatory, with the firelight flickering and rain threading silver lines upon the glass, the heroine felt the first true stirrings of possibility, not a performance, not a masquerade, but a revelation of hearts daring to speak, if only in whispers, the truths they had long denied themselves. The turning point was complete. The ruse, the scandal, the delicate game of observation, all had transformed into a private, charged understanding. And as the Duke's gaze held hers, steady and undeniable, she knew the path forward was perilous, intoxicating, and wholly irresistible. I cannot feign my heart any longer, it belongs to you entirely, irreversibly. The ballroom shimmered beneath the weight of crystal chandeliers, golden lights splintering across polished parquet and gilded mirrors. The air was alive with the murmur of well-dressed society, the rustle of silk, and the faint, nervous laughter of those attuned to every nuance of scandal and propriety. The heroine stood near the edge of the room, her posture erect, hands lightly clasped at her waist. The tension of the evening clung to her like a second skin, the whispers and glances of the curious pressing in, yet she remained resolute, a figure of composure and quiet defiance. Across the room the Duke's gaze found her, unwavering and magnetic. Each step he took toward her cut through the haze of candlelight and conversation, drawing the eyes of the room yet appearing to affect nothing beyond the heroine herself. His presence was both command and caress, a careful balance of authority and vulnerability. "You have endured much this evening," he said, voice low but resonant enough to carry across the distance between them. "Yet here you stand, unbroken, despite every gaze, every whisper. Tell me, have you no fear of the consequences of this, of us?" The heroine's lips curved in the faintest smile, the kind that carried both courage and defiance. "Fear is a companion, sir, but it has not the power to dictate my heart. Tonight, I will not yield to whispers nor to the cold calculations of society." He halted before her, close enough now for the warmth of his presence to brush against her skin. "And yet," he said, a shadow of a smile tugging at his lips, "all of that restraint, all of that careful composure, it masks nothing of what I feel. I have watched, I have waited, and I can bear it no longer. My heart, my thoughts, are yours. Entirely." Her breath caught, the words striking her like lightning, igniting a current that had been simmering beneath measured glances, whispered conversations, and stolen moments. Every act of courage she had summoned throughout the evening had led to this precise instant, where the masquerade of propriety and pretense dissolved into something raw, undeniable, and profoundly real. She began, faltering only for a heartbeat. "I feared at first that this was a game, a ruse, but your eyes, sir, they reveal a truth I can no longer ignore. My heart has long known what my mind dared not admit." He reached for her hand, the gesture deliberate, steady, and intimate, an unspoken promise of protection and devotion. The clasp of their fingers sent a current of quiet triumph through her, the weight of society's judgment momentarily suspended, powerless against the force of shared truth. "You are remarkable," he murmured, voice rich with admiration and longing. "Not merely for enduring what few could withstand, but for standing firm, for daring to claim the life and heart that are yours alone. I have waited too long, restrained too long, and yet here you are, not as a figment of expectation, but as yourself, vivid and undeniable." Her eyes glistened, reflecting the golden glow of chandeliers and the unspoken recognition that she, too, had emerged transformed. The evening's trials, the scandal, the scrutiny, the small, deliberate gestures that had marked the slow unraveling of pretense, culminated now in clarity. Every whispered accusation, every subtle token, had led them to this threshold, where restraint gave way to surrender and caution yielded to passion. As the first hesitant notes of a waltz rose through the room, the Duke extended his hand with an almost imperceptible bow of respect and devotion. "May I have this dance?" he asked, voice quiet, yet carrying the weight of certainty. She placed her hand in his, the touch a pact beyond words, a binding of hearts forged in courage and tempered by trial. As they moved together across the polished floor, the murmurs of the room became background hum, the gazes of society now powerless to diminish the radiance of their union. Each step was deliberate, each glance intentional, a dance of acknowledgement and devotion that no scandal could diminish. And in that moment, amid candlelight and mirrored reflections, the heroine understood fully. The trials of the evening, the audacity of pretense, and the subtle declarations of tokens and glances had all been necessary. For only by enduring, by daring to confront both fear and desire, could she claim a love that was neither whispered nor veiled, a love declared openly, fiercely, and irrevocably. The climax of tension resolved not in spectacle, but in presence, in shared understanding, in the intimate acknowledgement that the world's scrutiny could not fracture what had been forged in courage and truth. And as they continued to move together, poised and radiant, the promise of a shared life shimmered in every step, every breath, a triumph over both expectation and doubt, and a testament to hearts that dared, finally, to speak their truths aloud. In the end, it is not the world's judgment that defines us, but the courage of hearts that dare to love. The first light of dawn crept through the tall windows of the estate, gilding the grand halls with a quiet amber glow that softened the echoes of the previous night's grandeur. The ballroom, now emptied of guests and whispered scandal, retained the faint fragrance of flowers and candle smoke, a lingering memory of the tensions and triumphs it had contained. The heroine moved slowly, deliberately, through the silent corridors, each step measured against the weight of the evening's revelations. She had emerged from the storm of scrutiny transformed, not merely by the Duke's declaration, but by the understanding that courage and dignity could withstand even the harshest eyes. The Duke awaited her in the library, a room warmed by the gentle crackle of the hearth and lined with the orderly permanence of books. His gaze, steady and unyielding, held no trace of yesterday's formal restraint. It was the gaze of a man who had risked propriety, who had chosen truth over expectation, and whose devotion had been tempered in the fire of observation, scandal, and silent longing. "You rise even now with the grace of one who knows herself," he said, voice low but resonant, the words carrying both admiration and relief. "It is one thing to endure society's whispers, another entirely to claim your place beyond them. And yet here you are, unbowed, unbroken, radiant." Her lips curved into a faint, confident smile, the kind that belonged neither to coyness nor pretense, but to self-possession and inner triumph. "And yet, sir, it is your courage that has made this possible," she replied softly. "To speak, to claim, to see beyond the eyes that would judge us both. Without it, I might still dwell in shadows, hesitant to risk hope for the sake of propriety." He stepped closer, bridging the space between admiration and intimacy, and took her hand in his with a gentle firmness that spoke of commitment and unspoken promises. "Our hearts, once cautious and constrained, have found a rhythm beyond fear, beyond judgment. And that, I believe, is the truest triumph any of us can claim." Outside, the morning mist began to lift, unveiling gardens glistening with dew, pathways that led toward possibilities as yet unimagined. The heroine felt the soft pressure of his hand, steadying, affirming, and she knew that the trials of whispers, glances, and delicate tokens had all led to this single luminous truth: love, when dared, could reshape the world itself, if only for those brave enough to claim it. Moments passed in quiet companionship, their conversation reduced to gentle confidences and shared silences, each one deepening the intimacy that had grown through subtle glances, tentative confessions, and the charged vulnerability of the night before. The Duchess herself had long retired, leaving them to the weight and warmth of their private victory, an unspoken acknowledgement that the world's judgments were powerless against the gravity of courage and truth. A soft knock at the library door heralded a servant bringing letters and messages, reminders of society's persistence, yet neither dared to intrude upon the fragile cocoon of triumph and understanding. The heroine allowed herself a small, secreted laugh, a sound delicate yet resolute, reflecting the shift in her inner world. She had faced judgment, endured whispers, and navigated scandal, only to emerge with both dignity and desire fulfilled. He drew her near the hearth, their shoulders brushing, their hands entwined, and in the quiet glow of early morning, she realized that the stakes of society, whispers, glances, rumors, no longer bore weight against the certainty of what they had claimed together. Their shared history of tension, risk, and subtle understanding had culminated in a love both audacious and enduring, tempered by challenge yet unbroken by fear. "Whatever trials await us beyond these walls," he murmured, voice tender and unwavering, "we face them not as two strangers, nor as participants in a scandal, but as allies of the heart, undaunted, united." Her eyes met his, steady and luminous, and in that gaze she saw the reflection of courage rewarded, of hope embraced, and of love declared beyond hesitation. The world could murmur and judge, yet within these walls, amidst the lingering scent of candles and flowers, they had found their sanctuary. And so, hand in hand, hearts aligned and spirits emboldened, they stepped forward into the quiet morning, leaving behind whispers and intrigue, carrying instead the resolute promise that had been forged in fire, confession, and unwavering courage. A promise that neither judgment nor expectation could ever diminish. The heroine, once measured and reserved, now walked with the certainty of a heart unafraid, knowing that true triumph lay not in avoiding scandal, but in daring to embrace the love that had patiently awaited her courage to claim it.